So for your next project, we're going to be starting on something called Zentangle. Zentangle is something you could kind of call meditative doodling. It's basically the art of learning to draw a line and just accept where it lands and what it looks like in the end. It's a pattern making sort of practice where you make many patterns and fill a space with them, and just doing the patterns, the repetition, the mindlessness of it is supposed to be calming and supposed to clear the mind, stuff like that. So for this practice portion of the project, I'm going to have you guys do a small scale Zentangle on a normal 9x12 piece of paper. And you're going to fill a space with Zentangles. So for practice, you want to create a shape. You can either do a hand like I've done here, which I just traced my hand, kind of like you would have done whenever you're making like a little hand turkey. You could also do any number of other shapes. You could create like a pumpkin because it's fall. You could create just kind of an abstract shape. You could do the outline of a flower and fill that in. It's up to you. I'm happy with just about anything as long as it fills up roughly this amount of your paper. So I would say probably 2/3 of your paper should be covered with your Zentangle shape. So for this, you're going to need to fill your shape with at least, oh, that's a little chunky, 20 patterns. So 20 patterns total. And that is the minimum. You can have more than 20 patterns. You can have 21, but you could have 50 patterns if they're very small patterns. I guess that's up to you. But what I mean by filling the space with all those patterns is I don't mean like cut the hand into pieces and fill each space with those patterns. I mean, you can let them run into each other and overlap each other. And what I mean by a pattern is something like, so say this part of my hand is going to be a checkerboard. And then I fill this in like so. This is a very simple pattern, right? It's something that is repetitive. It's something that is filling up enough space that you can see that the pattern repeats over and over. So if I did a that's not done right. If I did a checkerboard that was like this, just this square right here, and like all I could see was like one dark, one light, that's not necessarily a pattern. So make sure it's big enough to fill up all your space. And you'll see I've messed up on this pattern already, but that's all right. You are supposed to, with Zentangle, start with a permanent ink of some sort. So you Zentangle with either a pen, a gel pen, a marker, etc. I've given you all Sharpie pens. The Sharpie pens have two ends. They have a thicker end that makes a nice thick stroke, and they have a skinny end like so. You can choose which one you need for which purpose. But your goal is to use all kinds of different patterns to fill in your space. And they don't have to be, checkerboard is a pretty standard pattern, right? That's just a pattern everybody recognizes. This is one I like to do, where I just take the lines, I start with 2 points, and I just work my way around until they overlap each other. I think that's kind of cool looking. It's simple, but it's repetitive. It's maybe not as detailed as it would be if I wasn't giving a demonstration, but you get the point. Patterns like that. Keep in mind things like writing your name like on the hand. That is not a pattern. Nothing about that repeats. You could, however, if you want to make up a pattern of just like letters, so like say I want to make a bunch of L's. I'm just going to rotate. Like so. It's maybe a weird pattern right now because I just came up with it off the top of my head, but it's still recognizably, it is the same shape over and over and over again. So as you can see, I've already got 3 patterns right here in this one finger. So 20 patterns shouldn't be too hard to achieve realistically. I caution you to make sure your patterns are not all itty bitty tiny, but also not all huge. This pattern right here, probably a little bit big. As long as it's balanced out with a lot of other ones that are smaller, it'll be all right. But if I made all my patterns this size right here, it would probably be not enough space to use 20 patterns. So manage your expectations there. Make sure whenever you're using your Sharpie on your paper, you always have a piece of scrap paper behind it, because if you do not, the Sharpie will bleed onto your table and it will not be a fun thing to clean up. However, if Sharpie does get onto your table, to clean Sharpie up, you just need to use isopropyl alcohol, like that stuff that's used for like in first aid kits. If you don't have any isopropyl alcohol, if you have hand sanitizer might work. It does have a high alcohol concentration. Not all hand sanitizer is made equal though, so not sure if it will, not sure if it won't. Isopropyl alcohol though is your best bet. But back to this, if you want to do different shapes, say your starting shape is like a pumpkin, like so. Fill that with 20 patterns, obviously not tiny. But this is a good shape to start with because you can fill your patterns like inside each wedge really neatly, which is fun. This is just a practice version of the project. This is not the final project, so get used to the idea of making patterns. If you need help coming up with ideas for your patterns, If you need help coming up with ideas for your patterns, go to Google and type in Zentangle patterns. Okay, you will find a ton of patterns on Google that you can use for examples. Some of them are more complex than others. Some of them are a little easier. I really like this kind of semicircle pattern that they've got here. They've got kind of scales, like a bubble pattern, this nice, neat kind of diagonal lines pattern. They get all the way up to more like detailed things like this. Look like we got some tree rings, some kind of cool flower shapes, some cross hatching. You get the idea. So if you run out of ideas off the top of your head, and I don't blame you if you do, because there's no reason for you to store just a million patterns in your brain, go to Google. Don't be afraid to use patterns that are available on the internet, because Zentangle is less about your own personal things that you come up with and more about just creatively filling the space in a way that is just repetitive and calming. So if you have any questions about this project, feel free to either post a comment on this project assignment, or you can join my office hours or come in to talk to me if you're on school. So yeah, that's just about it. 20 patterns, fill in a space, can be a hand, can be another shape, and that is where we're starting this lesson.